There are more than 3 million lakes scattered across Alaska, and on almost every map, Lake Iliamna is marked as the calmest and the largest of them all. Ask anyone who actually fishes it, and you will hear a very different story. They will tell you about the nets that come up shredded, sliced as clean as if a blade went through them, the steel hooks bent like paper clips, the aluminium boat hulls scarred by something that was never a rock, in water where no rock sits anywhere near the surface. For as long as people have lived on these shores, they have whispered about something enormous moving in the deep, and they have given it a name: Alaska's own Jaws. Except this is not a movie, and the real thing may be far bigger than anything you have ever seen. I am Ambrose Wild, and I have spent years chasing the stories that sit right on the edge of what we can prove. Most of them stay there. This one does not. Because the strange thing about Lake Iliamna is not the legend. It is how much of the legend the science quietly supports. Start with the water itself, because you cannot understand the monster until you understand the container. Lake Iliamna covers roughly 1,000 square miles. It runs about 77 miles end to end and sinks to nearly 1,000 feet at its deepest point. That is a body of water you could lower the Empire State Building into and still leave the antenna underwater. There are no roads to it. The villages along its shore, places like New Halen and Kokonok and Pedro Bay, are reached almost entirely by floatplane, the kind of small bush aircraft that lands directly on the surface. So from the very beginning, this is a lake that almost nobody sees, in a corner of Alaska most people will never reach. Now here is the part that matters for hiding. A deep, cold lake like Iliamna does not mix top to bottom. In the warmer months, the water separates into layers, a lighter, warm layer resting on top of a dense, freezing layer below, and the boundary between them is called the thermocline. To a swimmer, it means nothing. To a sonar operator, it means everything, because that boundary bounces and scatters sound. Below it, signals weaken, light dies completely, and a boat's fish finder often reads the layer itself instead of what is underneath it. An animal the size of a truck could hold position 40 feet under your hull, in a black no one has ever properly mapped, and the screen above would show you nothing but the thermocline. And almost none of that deep floor has ever been properly surveyed. Here is the part that makes it livable for something big. Cold water holds oxygen far better than warm water, so unlike a shallow, warm lake that would suffocate a large animal, Iliamna's frigid deep can support big, cold-blooded life indefinitely. That is not folklore, that is basic limnology, and it is the reason Iliamna keeps its secrets. But a good hiding place is only half of what a monster needs. It also needs a way in, and it needs to eat. And this is where Lake Iliamna stops being an ordinary lake and starts becoming something almost nobody expects. The lake is not sealed off from the sea. The Kvichak River drains out of its western end and runs down to Bristol Bay and the open Bering Sea beyond. That single river is a door, and things have already walked through it. Because Lake Iliamna is home to one of the strangest populations of animals in North America. Harbour seals. Real ones, hundreds of them, living in the lake year-round, hundreds of miles from the ocean, in pure fresh water. Freshwater seals are almost unheard of on Earth. There are only a couple of populations like it anywhere, and scientists are still working out exactly how Iliamna's seals got there, how they survived the winter under the ice, and whether they are quietly becoming their own kind of animal. These are seals that hunt in near total darkness under 3 feet of winter ice, diving into the same freezing black water where the legend supposedly lives. keeping breathing holes open through months of frozen surface. A few researchers now suspect Iliamna's seals have been cut off long enough to be drifting into their own distinct population, separate from every other harbour seal on the coast. Sit with that for a second. A marine predator swam up a river, decided to stay, and adapted to a lake. If a seal can do it, the door is open for something far larger to have done the same. And there is no shortage of food waiting for it. The Kvichak system feeds the largest sockeye salmon run on the entire planet. In a strong year, tens of millions of salmon pour up out of Bristol Bay and pack into these waters to spawn. Lake Iliamna is the nursery at the heart of it. So picture the full setup. A near bottomless cold lake with a permanent dark zone sonar cannot read. An open corridor from the sea. A proven history of ocean predators moving in and staying. And a food supply so vast it could sustain something enormous for centuries. If you were designing the perfect place on Earth to hide a giant unknown predator, you would struggle to design a better one than this. The people who lived here understood the danger long before anyone brought sonar. Their warnings came down through generations of oral history, carried in story and carving rather than written record. The way the accounts are told, there was a great creature in the water, strong enough to overturn a canoe and pull a person under. And the elders taught a simple rule for survival. When the surface began to ripple with no wind behind it, or when the water darkened without a cloud in the sky, you got off the lake. Those who ignored the warning did not always come back. You can treat that as superstition if you like, but strip away the mythology and what you are left with is generations of people telling the next generation the same practical thing. Something in this water is dangerous, and here is how you read the signs. And the descriptions stay strangely consistent across villages that had little contact with one another. A long body, a broad back, a size that dwarfs anything a person could reasonably mistake for a seal or a salmon. When outsiders arrived, the reports did not stop. They changed vocabulary. Russian fur traders working these waters in the 1700s left behind accounts of boats struck from beneath by something they never saw, and of men who went into the water and were never recovered. Those men had every reason to dismiss the local stories as native superstition. Many of them stopped dismissing it. When two completely separate cultures who share no language and no folklore describe the same enormous thing rising out of the same lake, you are no longer looking at one culture's myth. You are looking at a pattern. That pattern got its most famous witness in the summer of 1942. A bush pilot named Babe Allsworth was flying over the lake and, depending on which version you hear, he had a passenger with him that day. Below the plane, in clear water, Allsworth saw shapes. At first, he took them for logs drifting on the current. Then the logs moved, together, with purpose, turning as a group the way fish do, but on a scale no fish should reach. He counted more than a dozen of them, each one running as long as his aircraft, their backs flashing a dull silver in the sun, like polished aluminium. Allsworth was not a man prone to tall tales. He knew this lake better than almost anyone alive, and he was certain of what he had seen. When a pilot with that much credibility comes down and repeats a story that lines up with what the elders had been saying for centuries, and with what the fur traders wrote 200 years before, people stop laughing and start writing it down. The story reached far beyond Alaska. A wealthy Texas oil man with an obsession for hunting unknown animals funded expeditions to chase it. Fishermen kept adding to the file, and the detail that comes up again and again is not the sighting, it is the strength, the bent hooks, the heavy gear pulled out of shape. Whatever this is, the thing people keep describing is not just large, it is powerful, in a way that scares experienced fishermen, and those are not people who scare easily. By the 1970s and 1980s, the reports were not coming from one lonely pilot anymore. They were coming in clusters. Groups of residents standing on the shore, watching enormous shapes break the surface at the same moment, describing the same lengths, somewhere between 25 and 40 feet, some of them moving in pairs. A single witness is easy to wave off as a trick of the light. A dozen people on a beach, all pointing at the same spot, is a different problem. Then came the boaters, the ones who felt the water shove up under the hull before they saw anything at all, who turned for shore with their hearts going, and a story they would tell for the rest of their lives. One account from the late 1980s has more than a dozen people on the shore watching several huge shapes move through the water at the same time, in daylight, long enough that no one afterward could agree it away as a wave or a shadow. Mass panic does not usually hold still and let itself be counted. In 1979, the mystery went fully public. A reward, reported at around $100,000, was put up for hard proof of the creature, and Alaska lost its mind for a summer. Professional hunters, amateurs, and thrill seekers descended on the lake. Submarines were lowered into that black water. Sonar rigs swept the depths and came back with readings of large moving masses that did not behave like salmon or seals. Underwater microphones picked up low sounds nobody could confidently match to a known animal. And every rig, every hunter, every summer came back with the same result. Blurry images, suggestive readings, damaged gear. Nothing you could put on a table and call proof. The reward went unclaimed. As far as anyone can tell, it is still unclaimed today. If you are enjoying this and you want the real answer instead of just the campfire version, subscribe. I dig this deep into one Alaskan mystery every week. The ones where the legend and the evidence refuse to agree. Which brings us to the science, because in the last few decades, the people showing up at Iliamna stopped carrying harpoons and started carrying instruments. And what they found did not close the case, it cracked it wider open. The most serious explanation on the table comes from Alaskan biologist Bruce Wright, who spent years studying the region's waters. Wright's candidate is the Pacific sleeper shark, and once you know this animal, the theory is hard to shake off. Sleeper sharks are creatures of the cold and the dark. They cruise slowly through freezing deep water. They can live for a very long time, and some individuals are estimated to reach 20 feet or more. They are ambush scavengers and predators, built for exactly the kind of black, frigid, oxygen-rich deep water that Iliamna has in abundance. Their close cousin, the Greenland shark, has been aged at multiple centuries, making it possibly the longest-lived animal with a backbone on the planet. Greenland sharks have been cut open and found with seals in their stomachs, and on occasion the remains of reindeer and even polar bears. Animals no slow-moving shark should ever be able to run down. To this day, nobody is certain how they do it. Imagine one of those in a lake stuffed with millions of salmon. It would want for nothing, and it would almost never need to surface. And it would be built for the dark better than almost anything alive. Most Pacific sleeper sharks carry a parasite that fastens onto the eye and slowly blinds them, which sounds like a fatal weakness until you realize these animals barely rely on sight at all. They hunt the lightless deep by smell and by reading the faint electric fields that every living body leaks into the water. A predator like that does not need to see the salmon. It does not need the sun or the surface or us. It could spend an entire century in the black lair of Iliamna and never once come up for a reason anyone would notice. The white sturgeon is the other favourite. Sturgeon are living fossils, armoured bottom feeders that have barely changed in tens of millions of years, and the largest can pass 20 feet and live well over a century. 100 years ago, fishermen in the Pacific Northwest were pulling sturgeon out of the water at sizes that would not fit in the bed of a modern pickup truck, from a fish that can outlive 3 human beings in a row. A big sturgeon rolling at the surface with its ridged back and prehistoric shape is exactly what a lot of these sightings sound like. When the television angler Jeremy Wade brought a camera crew to Iliamna for his series on river monsters, these were the 2 suspects he circled, the sleeper shark and the sturgeon. And even with modern gear and decades of experience, he left the same way everyone leaves, convinced something real is out there, unable to prove which real thing it is. Here is the honest catch, though, and it is why the science raises the hair on your neck instead of settling your nerves. Every candidate has a hole. Pacific sleeper sharks are ocean animals, and there is no confirmed record of one living permanently in fresh water the way the theory needs. White sturgeon are not native to this lake at all, and no shark or sturgeon anyone knows behaves the way the eyewitnesses describe, moving in coordinated groups, surfacing together, running 40 or even 60 feet by some accounts. So the science does something worse than say no. It says maybe, but only if the animal is doing something no member of its species has ever been recorded doing. Modern tools have kept the maybe alive. Researchers have started sampling these waters for environmental DNA, the loose genetic traces every living thing sheds as it passes through. Every animal that swims a stretch of water leaves a faint trail behind it. Shed skin cells, mucus and waste drifting in the current, and that trail lingers long after the animal itself is gone. You filter the water, sequence what you catch, and read off a list of everything that has been there recently. Run correctly, the technique is powerful enough to detect an animal you never saw. And the way the accounts around Iliamna go, the samples return the expected residents, the salmon and the seals, alongside sequences that are harder to cleanly assign. Whether that points to an unknown animal or to the ordinary messiness of reading DNA out of an entire lake is exactly the kind of gap this mystery loves to live in. Then there are the stakes, the part of this that stops being fun. Over the decades, plenty of people have gone to Iliamna determined to bring back proof, and the lake has a way of sending them home with less than they came with. Boats have come back to shore with damage to the hull that the crew could not explain and would not repeat. Recording gear and nets have been lost to the water and recovered torn. And through all of it, across centuries of sightings and a summer of submarines and decades of science, one number has never moved. 0. Not one body Not one bone, not one clean photograph. Whatever this is, it has never once made the mistake that would end the mystery. And a thing that avoids capture that completely for that long is either not there at all or a great deal smarter than we want it to be. And lately, something has shifted. The sightings are not fading into history the way old legends usually do. If anything, they are picking up. The likeliest reason is not supernatural. It is the thermometer. Alaska is warming faster than almost anywhere on Earth, several times the global average, with parts of the state up more than 4 degrees over the last half-century, and the pace still climbing. The permafrost around the lake is thawing. The ice locks up later and breaks earlier, and the water itself is changing temperature and current in ways it never did before. Those changes reach right down into the deep layers where a large cold water animal would live. If the dark zone it depends on is shrinking or shifting, it would be pushed toward the surface and toward the shore, into exactly the places where people are. At the same time, the salmon runs that feed everything in this system are arriving on stranger schedules, and a predator follows its food. So you have a possible animal being nudged upward by a warming lake, chasing fish into shallower water right as more drones, more boats, and more sharp phone cameras than ever crowd the surface waiting to catch it. In 2019, drone operators over the lake filmed a long, dark shape gliding under the surface, too big to be a seal and too smooth to be a school of fish. The monster may not be appearing more often at all. It may simply be running out of places to stay hidden. And if all of that sounds like one lake's lonely madness, it is not. Iliamna belongs to a strange worldwide club. In Scotland, people have reported a long neck shape in the deep water of Loch Ness for the better part of a century. In British Columbia, the deep glacial lake called Okanagan has its own creature, Ogopogo, described in accounts going back generations as a huge dark animal moving in long coils. In Vermont, Lake Champlain has Champ. The pattern behind them is worth pausing on. These are almost all cold, deep northern lakes that were carved or filled at the end of the last ice age, when the glaciers pulled back and the seas rose. One theory that keeps resurfacing is that as those waters formed, small populations of large marine animals were trapped inland, sealed into deep, cold lakes, and left to adapt in isolation for thousands of years. And every one of those lakes, like Iliamna, is or once was tied to the ocean by a river, the same kind of open door a trapped population would have swum through in the first place. If there is anything to that idea, then Iliamna is not just Alaska's mystery. It might be one of the largest, deepest, least explored windows we have left into whatever got left behind when the ice let go. And unlike a crowded lake in Scotland, this one has the room, the darkness, and the food for something to grow. So strip it all down to what actually survives scrutiny. A lake deep enough to hide a skyscraper, with a permanent dark zone our instruments cannot read. A proven open door to the sea, and living proof in the form of freshwater seals that ocean predators have already used it. A food supply unmatched anywhere on Earth. Centuries of sightings from people who had nothing to gain and shared no common story. Real scientists naming real animals that fit almost perfectly and fail only on the last detail. A hiding place science admits it cannot see into. A food supply science admits is the richest on Earth. And living seals that science admits should not be there, and are. And after all of it, not a single specimen ever. I cannot tell you tonight exactly what moves through the deep water of Lake Iliamna, but I can tell you that the easy explanation, the one where it is nothing at all, is the one the evidence fits worst. So I will leave you with the only honest question left. When the surface ripples on a windless day out there, and every fisherman on that lake turns for shore without a word, what is it exactly that they already know? That is the kind of question I will keep chasing, one lake and one impossible story at a time. I am Ambrose Wild. The next mystery is already waiting for you on screen.